Alright, everybody, for today's Critical Thought, we're going to be talking about The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which I'm assuming if you somehow found this video, you already know what the game is about. But Nintendo's first big release for Nintendo Switch was a complete and fascinating success for the platform, earning multiple 9s and 10s as well as Game of the Year nominees and awards from many publications. And at this point, it's safe to say that the game was a good title. But one of the more fascinating aspects behind Breath of the Wild that I didn't see too many people talk about is that this is perhaps the most mature game to come from Nintendo in a very long time. And that's what I want to focus on today, with just how much Breath of the Wild breaks the Nintendo tradition and goes in its own direction. So, when it comes to Nintendo, as we've said in previous talks about the company, there are always two major criticisms levied against them. One is their reliance on their core franchises. Again, Mario, Zelda, Metroid. We're going to probably see a few more Mario Karts. Smash Brothers was just announced a few days at the time of this recording, and so on. And the other point is their focus on the younger demographic and basically having older gamers as second or third down the line. We see this with a lot of their games where the beginning or the opening levels are pretty much just there for the young kids, and it's kind of like having to eat your vegetables before you get to the main meal. I've heard people describe Super Mario Odyssey along that line as well, that it spends so much time with easing younger gamers in that there's not as much for older people compared to Galaxy 64 and Sunshine. But I haven't played that one yet, so I can't comment too much. But with that said, Breath of the Wild completely breaks that tradition. And there's 3 points I want to talk about today. The first one is a lack of guidance. Anyone who's played a Zelda game in the last 20 years has seen just how much of a guidance Nintendo focuses on with their games. Usually the first quarter to halfway point of a Zelda title is very hand-holding. You're going to get very long tutorials how to move your character, how to control the camera, where do you go from here. You get to listen to "Hey Listen" about 500 times in the span of the game. But for most older gamers who've played through the Zelda series, we know that not counting the original ones on the NES and SNES, you're going to be spending a good portion of that time waiting to get to the good stuff. And then usually the back half of the game is when the Zelda series just basically cuts loose and lets you go wild. With Breath of the Wild, however, the game basically starts you off with next to zero in terms of guidance. When I loaded the game up for the first time, I saw the little prompts at the bottom saying, move the left analog stick to move Link, press the right analog stick to turn the camera. And that was it. There was no more tutorials, there was nothing that stopped the game to inform the player how to do something. And instead, what Nintendo did was have one of the best examples of an organic tutorial that I've seen. And what they did was the plateau that you start out with, or start out on, is essentially a microcosm for the entirety of the Breath of the Wild experience. On that small, in terms of the relative game space of Breath of the Wild, you are taught how to move, fight, use your various items, how weather works, how cooking works, climbing, using your slate to create markers and explore from a distance, and you end by learning how to use that power glider that everybody loves to do. And all of this is again done within the span of the game space. And organic tutorial designs we've talked about with our Dissecting Design on Half-Life 2 can be very hard to get right, especially when you're trying to introduce a lot of mechanics or rules to the player. And I was actually taken aback by this, because I was expecting, like the whole time I was playing, for some message to pop up and say, go here, you need to go get this, you're missing this item, why don't you go over here? And nothing. No pop-ups came up outside of those brief tips that you see whenever you load up into a new area. And this is very daring for a Nintendo game. Again, going from playing a title where the first 10 minutes I'm told how to move and jump very slowly in a Mario game, to just metaphorically being dropped into this world was very astonishing. Now, the second thing that Breath of the Wild does, and probably one of the more lauded elements for it, was being just a great example of emergent game design. As we talked about before, emergent game design is presenting the player with enough tools and utility to allow them to essentially craft their own solutions or their own game mechanics or their own dynamics within the mechanics themselves. Essentially, it allows them to play the game they want, and the game space is open enough to allow that. And Breath of the Wild is a really great example, maybe one of the strongest examples that we can talk about for future discussions. But how Nintendo did this was essentially, again, build everything around almost common sense logic. For instance, I'll give you a good example of this. Back on that plateau that we just talked about, there is a gap between like one area of the plateau and the other, and I couldn't think of a way to get across it. And so I basically took the super long way around of climbing and getting around the winter part, and basically took me about 10 to 15 minutes extra to go from here to cross the gap right there. So I got the shrine, and I saw my way back, and I, just for the hell of it, hit the tree with my weapon. I noticed that the tree was like kind of getting cut, and then I thought, well, I have these bombs. Maybe I can, blow the tree up and, pick up the branch or something like that. So I put the bomb down, detonate it, and the tree literally just falls right exactly where I want to, creating that bridge that would have saved me about 15 minutes of travel time. And I just sat there on my bed with no one around, just went like this. I just had I didn't think that was going to be a solution. And that's the beauty of emergent game design, is that it allows you to start putting two and two together for how the various properties of the world work. Another case, the idea of using the stasis to basically, or this is something that I saw on Twitter, that you set a stasis on an object, you put bombs or whatever to increase the velocity of the object storing, get on top of it, the object shoots up in the air, you jump off, and now you basically have your own makeshift launcher for your paraglider. And that is astonishing. And that's just one of the main examples that Breath of the Wild does. Another point, being able to light the grass on fire to basically kill sleeping enemies, or to distract them from something else. Being able to shoot lightning into the water and thereby fry anything that's stepping in it. And again, there's a lot more we could talk about when it comes to emergent game design, and hell, we have spoken about many times over on this channel. But just to wrap up this section, it's just amazing the amount of little things that work in Breath of the Wild. The only complaint that I have is how the cooking system kind of gets there, but doesn't get all the way to being fully emergent. How it works is, once again, you have every bit of item that you can cook with has a property attached to it, such as, a main meal, this boosts your health, this gives you ice resistance, stuff like that. And what I want to do is try and combine those properties together, like make a food that gives me bonus to attack, defense, and additional health. But the problem is that it's not developed that deep. It only allows for one property along with healing and probably heart restoration. So I can't just make the ice, fire, lightning, poison resistance potion that I dreamt. But it's still a great example, again, of piecing all this stuff together to figure out how the world works. And speaking of how the world works, the final point that I want to talk about that makes Breath of the Wild so different, this is a hard game. And this is coming from someone who's played every Soulsborne title, who can relax to playing God Hand and Devil May Cry 3. But Breath of the Wild is a hard game. And I am playing the game completely blind. I didn't read any guides, I didn't look up anything specifically about where to go, and I am getting my butt kicked in this game. This is the first time in a Zelda title that combat is dangerous. Normally, if anyone's played a Zelda game, most enemies will do like a half heart damage, a whole heart here and there, but you can usually tank it. In this game, some of the starter enemies outside of the plateau can hit for 6 hearts, and you only have, I think, 3 or 4 at the onset. And it's a game that really requires you to think about how to get into each encounter, especially with the boss fights. And I will say this, I have died more in Breath of the Wild than I think I have died collectively to any other previous Zelda game. And that is crazy. Now, when it comes to Zelda, I do have a few problems with it. It does feature some of my least favorite systems in game design, and that's actually going to be the subject of another critical thought, so I don't want to, segue into that just yet. But I am honestly not sure if I'm going to be able to beat Breath of the Wild, because I find this game just exhausting to play, just with the sheer amount of stuff you're going to do in it. And this, again, goes back to the maturity of Breath of the Wild. This is a game that really makes you work for any form of progress. And that is a complete 180 from playing other open world titles of 2017, such as Horizon Zero Dawn or Assassin's Creed. And in those games, again, your reward is basically get to the point, hey, you get a experience or you unlock something. In Breath of the Wild, simply unlocking portions of your map is an ordeal in of itself, especially the later towers that are surrounded by poison muck and sniping turrets and some crazy wizard guy who was flying around spitting bats at me. It was just sheer insanity. And even the dungeons are completely unique. And again, if I'm not careful, this will just turn into a Breath of the Wild mini Dissecting Design. And if it wasn't for the fact that I can't record footage without getting a capture card, I would completely do a Dissecting Design on Breath of the Wild, because it is that amazing of a game. And while this is going to be attached to a written piece, I will have my review or my thoughts of the game in written form up on Game Wisdom shortly, as well as, again, that critical thought discussing my least favorite game systems I've seen in game design. But with that said, we're going to wrap things up here. For those of you watching this, I gotta ask, for those of you who have played through Breath of the Wild, what did you think of it? And were you an older fan of Zelda, or was this your first game? Because I'm really curious to hear the overall impressions of Breath of the Wild beyond just saying it's a great game. I want to know just how easy you found it, or just how much of a shock it was to play this game. And from interviews, I've heard that they want to continue with this style for future iterations of Zelda, and I am definitely for that. And if this is the start of Nintendo trying to, go and evolve their design, I am certainly looking forward to it. And hopefully you know our little link right here. I also have Ganondorf, Zelda, and Sheik, whatever their name is, somewhere around here as well. But we're going to wrap things up for today's critical thought, so say goodbye to Link over here. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night. Before we get to the credits, just wanted to give a quick thank you and shout out to the supporters over on patreon.com/gwbicer. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/gwbicer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.